and welcome to today's webinar, Exposing the 9 Myths, 9 Webinar Myths. My name is Gavin Hunt, and I'll be your facilitator for today's event. Today we'll be taking a look at the Redback Report and uncovering all the myths and all the facts. If you're looking to launch a webinar series or interested in enhancing the way you currently run webinars, then you're definitely in the right place.
Well, great. Thanks, Gavin. Welcome, everyone. And as Gavin mentioned, I'll be chatting with Sarah about some of the key myths exposed within our Redback Report. So let's get started. How are you today, Sarah?
I'm very well, thank you, Isa, and welcome everybody for joining today's webinar. As Isa and Gavin both said, we are going to be talking about webinars today, and more in particular, the actual Redback Report. So as Gavin mentioned, we actually launched the Redback Report in early 2013, and that's now been released, and we're going to talk about the 9 myths that people associate with webinars and the facts that came out of the report. We're also going to be along the way providing you with some tricks and tips for hosting your own webinars or perhaps enhancing the webinars that you're currently running, and then we're also going to provide you with a case study and show you how other people have done it, particularly membership organisation, and then delve into any other questions that you may have. So let's get started. And what I'm going to do, and we'll explain this a little bit later, but I'm going to have Gavin turn off our webcams. That way we can all focus on the presentation at hand. And then what we can also do is come back to that within the Q&A part of the webinar and launch them back. So I believe we have a poll, Isa.
Yes, we do. All right, so just launching that now. Bear with me for a moment. So just asking you guys now, how many webinars have you hosted before? 10 plus, between 5 and 9, under 5, 0, or if you don't know what a webinar is, please click What's a Webinar?
Great, and it's good to see we've got a lot of people saying 10 plus. We've got people who have said 0. So we've got quite a different amount of intelligence behind everyone joining. And that's great because really it gives us as webinar presenters an indication of how familiar you are with a platform like this. And as we can see, we've got a lot of people on here who haven't even hosted any webinars before, but we've also got people who are quite familiar with them. So that's a good segue into our next point, Isa. So we'll close that poll. And what we'll do now, we'll actually show you exactly what a webinar is. And really, a webinar is what we're on today. So as you can see here, you've got your presenter or presenters, which are located, we're in a boardroom at the moment. There's a few of us in here presenting from our laptops. That information, whether it's a PowerPoint slide you're presenting, maybe it's a video you're presenting, or maybe a document, that's actually transmitted over the internet, and that goes to your audience anywhere. So what I might get people to do is just type into the messages box how they're joining the webinar today. So are you from home? Are you outdoors maybe? Maybe you're out in the park on your iPad or something. Perhaps you're actually in your office, which I'm assuming most people would be. Yep, here we go. Most people are actually at work from their office. But if you wanted to, you could be joining it from wherever you were. And that's the beauty of webinars, and the beauty of webinars really for membership purposes. It's really about increasing engagement, opening up communication channels, and also providing education. And you'll see here in terms of uses for webinars, we like to say the use for a webinar is as broad and imaginative as an organisation's imagination. So online training, professional development, even lead generation, a lot of people use them for, product launches, announcements, any way that you need to communicate with people and you may not have the budget or you may not have the ability to travel or something like that. So in a nutshell, that's what a webinar is, and really, like I said before, it's what we're actually on today. So hopefully that explains it all.
Fantastic. That was a great explanation. All right, so now we're moving on to talking about the Redback Report. Now, Sarah, can you explain the reasons behind the Redback Report?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, it was a survey that we conducted earlier this year, and really we went out there, we surveyed people who are in our Redback community and really wanted to get insights from anyone who had joined an online meeting such as a webinar. So the reason for this is, we've seen the Australian conference in space grow significantly over the last few years. But people know how to actually log on to a webinar and use a webinar. But when it comes to insights and, education and, the pros, how the pros do it, really there's nothing like that in Australia. You could go on Google and you could Google, what makes a great webinar or how to run a fantastic webinar, and you'll get a wealth of information from the states, whether it be blogs, whether it be, websites. But what we tend to find in the work that we do is that people within Australia are a little bit different, especially for membership organisations, as some of you would be on this webinar. You do have quite a geographically dispersed membership base. So what we do here in Australia is a little bit different. So the report really was to shine a spotlight on the pros and cons of virtual meetings and events. And it really was to, play into part to inform, inspire and educate the people that we work with. So hopefully that's going to shine through today. And the report covered four main things, accessibility, how people access webinars, what their preferred options are, opinion. We do know that everyone has a different opinion, so we want to capture all that information and then put it into a very pretty looking report, which we hope we've achieved. And the big questions, we call it the big five, and there's 5 big things that people are always asking us. So we wanted to get people's opinions on that. And how important. So people are coming up to us when they start webinars and they come to Redback and they say, I've been told that this is really important during a webinar, or I've been told that that's really important. We want to find out how important this stuff really was and whether or not it's just hearsay and people talking about it, or whether or not it really does make a difference to your webinars.
Great. Now, you do keep referring to your community. So who are they exactly?
Yeah, so the people, just to give you an overview just quickly of who the people were that we surveyed, not surprisingly, 63% of people who came through were from the not-for-profit association space. So, people usually, this isn't surprising to us, to be honest. People who we work with in this space are quite early adopters of technology, so that was quite common to us. However, one of the things that wasn't so common was more the industries over if we look at the verticals. So marketing and comms and education, we knew that would be quite high, but there are a lot of people from the government and community sector who were actually partaking in webinars on a regular basis. So that was something new to us. So as you can see here, the people, this is what I really wanted to make a point of, the people who did complete this survey and provide us with their insights, they're not just from, the healthcare and medical space, or they're not just from, a sport association. They're actually from a range of associations, and they're actually showing us what works for them. So we've got a very varied response, which I think is important for these types of studies.
Great, very interesting stuff there. Now, let's just get right into the myths. All right, now remember everyone, if you have any questions, please do feel free to type them into the chat box on your bottom left. All right, so going to myth 1, and you briefly did touch on this. Many think that webinars are only for large corporate companies and that technology is a major deterrent. What did the report uncover?
Yeah, I think, and we think that many see technology as quite a daunting thing, and many of you would probably agree out there, and some see it as, don't go there, it's going to be too hard sort of thing. And I think many associations also think that their members have a certain way of doing things and they don't want to, rock the boat, and they want to keep things the way they are. However, we did ask people why they choose to attend webinars, and here's what the report showed. The largest percentages actually come from professional development and learning education. So this is all member heartland out there. We've always known as an organisation, doing this for quite some time, that business meetings are quite common. And this flows back to when people started teleconferencing on a big Polycom and also using web conferences for sales presentations. But really, professional development and learning education is what people are joining these webinars for. Personal development obviously isn't going to be as high because it's not something that you're actually getting accredited for, perhaps. But I guess, this is really just, conveying to everyone out there, don't be scared to jump into these types of technologies because people are doing them. And hopefully today we can shed some more light on the reasons why and the benefits.
Great. Now, when it comes to hints and tips for getting more members engaged and familiar with webinars, what do you recommend?
I think as we've got here, it's important when delving into anything, obviously, to research it quite well and find out, what people are wanting from it, but really simplify the process. Like I said earlier, people can be quite daunted by technology, so simplify the process, reinforce the benefits, and use it as a way to market yourself to stand out from your competitors. You want to make it easy for people to join your webinars, so if you are deciding to launch into a webinar series, or perhaps you have done it and you're looking for simple ways, maybe try and make it easy for people to join, and really as an organisation convey the benefits into what it is for them. And sometimes that sounds simple enough, but really focusing on that is quite important.
Great, thanks for that. Now, let's talk marketing. Seems to be quite common that many think marketing the webinar should be done the same as everything else. Now, if an association uses their membership journal on a regular basis, shouldn't they use this to market their webinar?
Yes and no. The report showed us that it is an online world, which we'll go to in a moment. But I think it's really about mixing things up a bit in the way that you do things. Webinars are an online medium, first of all, so that's something that you need to keep in mind. And while it's all well and good to passively market, maybe through traditional forms of marketing, so your monthly journal that you send out to your members, it's really about thinking how that's going to then convert to an online registration page. It's much easier to get people to register online for a webinar, especially if it is paid professional development. So are you going to use a QR code, or if someone going to read your journal and think, I need to go type this into a web address? So while talking about your webinar in print media is important to get your word out there, we definitely recommend using some other avenues. And as you can see here, we've got a large chunk of people spending a lot of time on the internet. And people at work are doing it all the time as well. So we recommend using a variety of channels, and really it does depend on your audience as well. So it's really about using social media, for example, but then on the other side, if you've never used social media before, don't start launching a webinar and then launch a Facebook page, because your members aren't going to be familiar with that at all. Really think about how you're going to convert people and get them to register for the webinar, Isa.
Fantastic. All right, so now we're moving on to some of the big questions, and I'm sure you guys are dying to know about this. When is the best time to actually hold a webinar?
Yeah, this is a very, very common question that we get, and the reason why it is because it makes such a difference to your registrations, but more so your attendance rate. People come up to us and they say, I want to hold a webinar at lunchtime because lunch and learn. And lunch and learn is a very, very popular phrase that has been going around for some time now. And the whole concept is quite simple. So you have a lunch break, you sit down, you watch a webinar, you get inspired, you get educated, and you can eat your lunch at the same time. But what we actually found with this report is that people, the largest percentage, 41% of people said they prefer mid-morning. Now, I just want to say this before we go any further, that this isn't gospel by any stance, and this is really all about getting to know your audience. So what might work for your association might not work for another association out there. So it really is about finding out what works best. However, there are reasons or are things that you need to think of before you decide the time of day. So the reason why people did say mid-morning was the best time for them is because they can come into work, they can filter through their emails, grab a cup of coffee, do what they need to do, and then still be fresh enough to concentrate on a 1-hour webinar presentation, for example. And then, they get to lunchtime and they've had their lunch, they've been educated, they've done what they need to do, and then they can focus on something else throughout the afternoon. So that was the main reason behind that. Now, in terms of lunchtime, people do say that it is a good time for them. But then people said if they are partaking in it for professional development purposes, then their organisation should really accept that and let them study online through work hours. So they think, why should I have to take my lunch break to actually partake in education, which is also another point. And then another point that came through is really the evening. So we have a lot of customers who actually use the evening, so after hours, to actually run webinars, especially for professional development purposes. And that works well for them. But then think about distractions as well, and once again, this also plays into your association. So think about the distractions, think about people leaving work. Are they in the type of space where they can leave work and, go home and do some education? But I think, this is all well and good. Here's some survey stats and here's this, and do consider this. But also what we recommend is to survey the people who you work with. Survey your members. Find out what's going to suit them best. And, you know, while you're never going to get the right answer for everybody, going out there and surveying your members saying, look, we're looking to launch a webinar program. This is what we're thinking. What times would suit you best, or what time of day would you prefer, and sort of give them some options. And, you know, if that works for you and you come back and you've got your answer, that's all great. But it also shows that you're paying attention and you're giving people what they want. So, yeah, on fact 3, definitely consider the 3 main options that we see as, you know, your mid-morning, your lunchtime, and then also your evening, and find out from your members how that's all going to work when you start your series.
Great. So now we're going to another poll. Just like earlier, please respond with the most appropriate answer to what do you think makes webinars not so enjoyable? Is it poor content, lack of facilitation, lack of interaction, poor presentation, difficulty joining, or a poor presenter?
Great, and I'm really interested to see the responses here. For anyone who has joined a webinar, I'm sure you may have experienced one of these at one time or another. I know I have. But what we ask people is what makes webinars not so enjoyable and then also so enjoyable. So I'm interested to see if this feedback matches up with the feedback we have, and to see that all works. So we've actually got presenter, and there we go. This is quite interesting, actually. So we've got 50% of people, 50, here we go. Yeah, so poor presentation and poor content comes in quite even. So let's just close that and let's just move into the next slide, because this may be interesting for everybody. And this ties into the next myth, which is content is king, and everyone is fascinated by content. And I agree with that. Content is amazing, but it does have its place in an organisation, especially when it comes to marketing and membership services. So, you know, people think I have the most amazing content, so my webinar is going to be amazing. But actually what we found was something a little bit different. And once again, this is going to be different for different people, but I think what we just showed then with the poll is that content isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all. It's really about presenters. And everyone just said then, 50% of people actually said that it was the presenter that makes, or a poor presenter, sorry, that makes a webinar less enjoyable. So here we go. Technology came in quite high, and I think that's for obvious reasons. If people can't join your webinar, then they're not going to be too impressed, are they? But presenter was numbered at 25%, number 1, and then content came in at 12. So I guess really the thing to remember is that while content is important, it isn't the be-all and end-all. So we recommend focusing on a range of things. So obviously choosing your presenter carefully is one. But the biggest thing is really getting them trained up on the presentation. People have amazing presenters. They sit in front of a computer, and as an organizer of a webinar, you may go out and find the best presenter in your industry. But when you sit them in front of a computer, just be aware that things are going to change. They're not going to get that instantaneous feedback as they would with a face-to-face event. They can be a little bit daunted by the technology, especially in how to use it. So I think that really ties into the poor presenter side of things, and that's really getting them familiar with how to use everything.
Now, I do have a question for you, Sarah. Now, that's all well and good, but if you as an organizer of a webinar are not familiar with the technology yourself, then how are you supposed to make it easy for your presenters?
That's a good point, and we're not by any means saying that everyone's an expert on webinars out there, not at all, but it really is having a facilitator or a moderator. So this comes in handy. So similar to Gavin today, and Gavin's doing an amazing job facilitating Isa and myself, Gavin's job as a facilitator is to manage the webinar and look after technical requirements. So we take care of all the moving of the slides and all the content, and we put this all together, but we focus purely on the presentation. Gavin sorts out the Q&A and any technical things that we need behind the scenes, you know, bringing the webcams off and on. That's how that all works. So really consider a facilitator. And if you're organising a webinar, why not consider using yourself as a facilitator or a moderator? You probably 9 times out of 10 know the content and know what you want to achieve out of the webinar more than anyone else. So why don't you get online and help your presenter out, help them with the format and the content of the webinar as well. And that way you'll see a much more seamless end result as if you just put your presenter in front of a screen, walk out the room, give them a high five and say off you go. Little things. Isa and I are sitting across from each other right now, so we can give each other feedback and stuff like that. If you have, 5 presenters all lined up on one side of the room, that's not really going to come across as very conversational at all. So think about the little things and think about little things that you can do to make it more comfortable for your presenter while they're actually online.
All right, so now we've got quite a few questions that have come up, Sarah. So we'll just start with Sumit. Now he's asked, do you know if webinars are being used by the most regional or rural or metro regions?
Yeah, we know from this survey, we didn't actually ask a lot of that because we know probably 80% of our customers who are using webinars are for rural and remote purposes. And Caitlin, you've said, that you have trouble reaching with educational content. And there are a few tips there. And webinars, this is one of the main reasons why they're used to reach those rural and remote locations. If you have members that are based out in Wagga Wagga and you expect them to fly into Sydney once a month for educational purposes, then that's not really going to be a reality. And that's probably a very, very broad example. But if you are going to launch into something like this and you are going to do it with, in mind you do have rural and remote members, there are a few things to take into consideration. And one of those is really technology-based. So be mindful of bandwidth as well. And we'll go into this a little bit later. So people out there don't necessarily have the best technology unless they are already part of the MVN, which we wish we all could be. But one of the things that you should be mindful of is the bandwidth consumption side of things. So if you do have 5 presenters online and you have them all on webcams, how's that going to affect your rural and remote attendees? And then as you'll see today, we've got a hybrid solution set up. So we're actually speaking through a telephone, but we've probably got, I think Gavin will be able to enlighten us on this, how many people we have on the telephone versus listening to the webinar via the internet.
About 5 people on the phone, whereas we've got nearly 50 on the actual internet.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Gavin. So that shows us that we've got 50 people out there who actually have great internet connection, but the other 5 who are listening on the phone may be having issues with the internet somehow. They could be on a wireless network or maybe a poor network, but that way you have an option for them to dial into the phone. So always consider technical options for those based in rural and remote locations.
Definitely something to consider. Hey, Sarah. All right. Now, next question from Marianne and Stacey, who are interested in the survey sample size.
Yeah.
What was that?
So this was the first one that we actually sent out, and we had a total of 260 people complete the survey.
Great. So that's all the questions for now. We'll move on to the next myth.
Yeah, just a point on Colin, actually. Webinars end up thinly disguised sales pitches. I tend to agree with that sometimes. A lot of webinars that I join just end up with people selling the entire time. And lead generation webinars are becoming very common in Australia now. But it is important, if you are using webinars for lead generation purposes, that they are purely educational and that, even if you are using them to sell something, you don't go in there and show, be as salesy as you possibly can be. So definitely a good point there from Colin.
Great. So moving on to myth number 4. Sorry, 5.
Yeah. We're going on to number 5 now. So this is another big question. Now, we're talking about webcams, which we just briefly mentioned. So these are one thing people either love or hate. So if you have presenters coming on and they say to you, I want to be on the webcam, and it's like, if I'm not on the webcam, then I don't really see the point. It's all over. What you should really focus on is the education, the content, and your presenter being comfortable. And you'll see here that when we actually uncovered the facts, what people were saying, 44% of people said that webcams are great. 4% said that they were just okay, and 22% said they're not so great. And I think this really plays into a few things. Like I just said earlier, in terms of bandwidth, really consider where your people are joining from. And if you're going to have webcams up just for the sake of it, and you're then going to have people who can't listen to the webinar because the webcams are taking up all their bandwidth, really think about that. And then also really think about the timing of it as well. So you will see earlier we had our webcams on because we wanted to put a face to the name. We wanted you guys to see who we are, and I personally think it's a little bit better to have a bit of an introduction with a face on there so you can see who's talking, as opposed to us just appearing out of thin air. But now we want you to focus on the presentation, and we want everything to run as seamlessly as possible. Also, if people are joining on the telephone, there's going to be quite a lag in terms of the synchronization. So we're thinking of technology as well. But then at the end, we're going to bring the webcams back up for Q&A sessions as well. So if you consider the format of your webinar, if you have a panel of presenters, which one of our associations that we work with do, they actually launch them at the beginning. Then everyone has their little pitch in between, and they'll launch the webcams then. But there's no point having 3 or 4 webcams up with your presenters if half of them are just sitting there doing nothing. It can be a little bit awkward for a lot of people as well, so really consider that. And then there's other things to consider as well as a webinar organizer, as if there wasn't enough. One of them is what people are wearing and the background. So are you sitting somewhere where you've got people walking past constantly and not realizing that? Do you have any like logos or anything that you can put in the background? And then with your presenters, if they come into your office and present a webinar and they're dressed in a shirt with stripes, when they come onto the webcam, it's going to have like a fuzzy effect, if you like. So clothing you've got to think about, makeup you've got to think about, a few other things which really come into play there. So like I said, really think about the topic, what you're presenting, how you're presenting it, and then consider whether or not you're going to use webcams.
Definitely some great tips there. Okay, so moving on to number 6. When we talk about people showing up, what are we actually referring to?
Yeah, this is a great point, and I think there's a misconception about this out there. People assume that if you have 150 people registered, all the hard work is done, and they're actually going to show up on the day. And I don't want to deter anyone from running webinars by all means, but I really want to let people know that sending an invitation, collating your registrations is only really half of it. So the reality is that if you're holding a free event, you're looking at around 50 to 60% of people actually showing up on the day. Anything more than that is excellent, so well done. And if you're holding a pay event, you're looking more around the 90% mark because obviously people are paid for something, so they're more inclined to show up. And just on that, a high percentage, we've got 65% of people who actually did complete the survey. They actually said that all the events they attend are free as well. So there's a lot more free events out there as opposed to paid events as well. So something else to consider if you want to charge or maybe offer your events free of charge. So a few little tips here in getting people to show up. I think that's what we really want to see. Really think about how you can get people to show up on the day as opposed to registering and forgetting about it. And one of the things is reminder emails. And reminder emails everybody uses, but I think we really need to start thinking more strategically in terms of when you're going to send these reminder emails. Now, personally, when it comes to webinar invitations, we always say that it's great to passively market your webinar, a month or two beforehand, however you want to do that. But when it comes to actually sending dedicated emails to your membership base and saying, look, we're holding a webinar, we don't really say anything more than 2 weeks out. We send ours 1 week beforehand because if you think about it, and a lot of this comes down to common sense and thinking about how yourself as an attendee would react. If someone sends me an invitation for a webinar, which is quite an easy thing to join, I click a link, I put in a code, and it's all done, I don't even know what I'm doing for dinner in a month's time, let alone whether or not I'm going to have a calendar free to join a webinar. So really think about the attendees and how they're going to see that as well. So once you send that invitation out, you send out the autoresponder. When are you going to send out the reminder email? And there's a fine line between bombarding people with too many emails, and I think we all know that now. But really think about the time as well. So if you're holding a webinar at 10 a.m., are you going to send an email reminder to someone at 8 a.m. in the morning when they come into work at 9 and they've got about 40 other emails in their inbox? Or are you perhaps going to send it the day before so they know that the day before they can, oh, yeah, that's right, that webinar's on. And for 1 o'clock webinars like we're doing today, we definitely recommend around 4 hours before. And within these, include calendar links, add to calendar, and they're so simple to create. It's an iCal. So you would have noticed in these the registration process for today, there's an add to calendar. And the day of the webinar, if I remember it, the last thing I want to be doing is going through my email inbox and trying to filter through that webinar invitation that I got a few days ago. Always include the iCals. It's in people's calendars. It will pop up with a reminder and it will prompt them to attend. And then also giveaways, virtual giveaways. It's something that can sort of mix things up and make it a little bit more interesting. But if you are going to do this, let people know that you are. And today, you would have noticed in the reminder email, we actually told people that they will have access to the report and also the white paper, which is all about marketing your events, which is quite topical. So I'm going to get Gavin. He's going to now point the bottom right-hand corner in that documents folder. There's links to actually download these documents, and you can do it now or you can do it at the end of the webinar. And we'll also give you access to this in the follow-up email that we'll be sending shortly. So there's a variety of different ways that you can actually obtain this report, as well as any other documents that are in there. And yeah, that's another way to, as you can see there, another tool that you can use to increase engagement. And just another thing, getting people to show up. If you do have a series as well, you do really want to think about the time of day that you are holding those, and also if you are offering CPD points. So yeah, just a few tips there to get people to show up on the day. And if anyone has any other tips on things that they're currently doing to get people to show up to their webinars, or maybe anyone out there has a really high attendance rate that they're really proud of, feel free to share it in the messages box.
Fantastic. So we're nearly done. Yes. Moving on to myth number 7, right?
Great. So this really ties into Catherine's question, I think. Is it worth spending thousands to record a broadcast or webinar in a studio professionally done? And I'll go into that in a moment because that's a good point. Most people think, I just need to do my webinar live, and those who don't show up. And we've just saw that you're going to have around 40 to 50% of people who won't show up, most probably. So how do we actually cater to those people? And how do we make sure that you're engaging and communicating with them? If something comes up, usually with our webinars, we have people reply directly to us and, they're really sorry and they're really apologetic and they really want access to this afterwards. So what we tend to do is always record our webinars and, try and make yourself and your content as accessible as everything. And I think this makes sense because 60% of people actually said that it's extremely important to have their webinars recorded, and 35% said somewhat important. So you're still looking at a high level of importance there as well. So just a few things about this. Like I said, think of the average attendance rate. Think of when you're going to send out the recording as well, but make sure that you tell people when you're actually going to send this out. And then think of other benefits of on-demand content. So SEO, if you have videos online, your search engine optimization is only going to love it. It's not going to hate it, and Google is only going to respond positively to that. Think about building a webinar library that you can have on your website for your members to access. Think about a YouTube channel that you can have to upload your videos to. And once again, think of as many avenues as possible that you can share this content. You can even sell it afterwards as a revenue generator or offer it, like I said, as continuing education. One thing I will mention here, and this really comes down to the editing process and how you're managing that, whether you're using a third party or yourself, is think about this when you run your webinar live. So if you're running a webinar live, if I join a recorded version of a webinar, say next week, and it's like, good morning, today we're talking about this, and yesterday this happened, and tomorrow that's going to happen. Think about the relevance of someone watching that 2 weeks later, and always advise your presenters to think about that. So always tell your presenters that your content's being recorded, and think about the relevance for someone watching your webinar at 11 p.m. at night or something like that. Are you going to work around that with your presenter in a live environment, or are you perhaps going to edit that out? This morning, so yeah, I just did that. No, Gavin actually spoke about housekeeping rules before. So we're going to edit that bit out. If someone's joining your webinar and they say you've got your presenter talking about how you can write in the chat box and stuff like that, it doesn't really appear relevant for the person actually watching that. So in response to Catherine's question, is it worth spending thousands to broadcast your webinar in a studio? I'm not quite sure if you're talking about webcasting, so broadcasting in that sense. But in terms of recording a webinar like we're on today, it's quite a simple process and it's not that expensive at all. So maybe if you can just elaborate a little bit more as to what you're referring to there, and then we can go on to that question.
Fantastic. Now, moving on to a very common myth. Myth number 8.
Yes, here we go. Another one. Presenter training is for amateurs. So as I said earlier, you all go out there and you source these amazing presenters, and then what happens when you put them on a computer? And a lot of presenters, they don't say it in this way, although some of them might, or a lot of people say my presenter is professional, they're not going to need training at all. But consider this. It's not all about your presenter and their knowledge and what they're bringing. There's a few other things to take into account. Personality at 21%. We ask people what makes presenters memorable. And, these are the things that people said, it's not about your great PowerPoint, as you can see there, down at 10%. It's not all about that. Passion is obviously something that they need to have as well, which would come through. But personality, so just because it is a professional environment, and this is going to depend on the industry and the reasons why you are conducting webinars, but let your presenter's personality shine through. You're not in front of a large audience, so you don't have those feedback signals or that, instant engagement that you might have face-to-face. So make sure you encourage your presenter to relax, just present as they normally would, and like I said, make it easy for them in the room. Have someone across from them like Isa is with me, which has been lovely. Knowledge is obviously important as well, but I would really just focus on making them aware of the differences between face-to-face and online. And one of the great things that you can advise your presenters to do is storytelling. We had a few guys from a presenter training course come in and enlighten us on this. So storytelling is something that your presenters can do, and it goes back to like old war stories, if you like. So getting them to put themselves into your audience's shoes and getting them to engage with them by telling them a story or something that's happened to them or something that might just create an instant connection. That also helps as well. So that's obviously going to depend on your audience, how you're conducting webinars and the reasons and your topic, but think about how you can make it as human as possible. You don't want to sound like just someone speaking through a megaphone or some robot behind a computer. You want them to appear as human as possible. And then functionality and tools as well. If you do have a presenter who is going to be a little bit more memorable, you want them to be more memorable, get them to engage using some tools available. Get them to launch polls like we're doing now and try and get as much feedback from the audience as possible. That's definitely something that we recommend, not only to make presenters memorable, but to keep people online at the end of the day, which is what we all hope for.
Great. Now, moving on to the last myth. Any guesses?
If anyone has any guesses, no, let's just get straight into it. Okay. Great exit survey feedback means great webinar. So first of all, for those of you who may have not hosted webinars, exit survey feedback is something that's definitely recommended. We have people who come to us and they want to run a webinar. They close the webinar down and then they send an email the next day asking people for their feedback. And, if you have a webinar on in the afternoon or late at night, you go to bed, you wake up and like, so much happened between now and then. I have no idea, that maybe the presenter wasn't memorable, and you just move on to something else. Exit survey feedback means that when we close down the webinar, as you'll see today, as an attendee, you'll be redirected to an exit survey. And that's recommended because it's front of mind, people have just attended, it's right there, they can complete the feedback, and it's done. Like I said at the beginning, you want to make it easy for people. Them joining a webinar shouldn't have to be a task or an extra thing on their list to do. So definitely use exit surveys. However, what a lot of people tend to do is get the feedback and go, that was amazing, everyone loved it, everyone said it was great, now let's move on. That isn't necessarily the case. And here's why. There's a few things that people use or people do within a webinar that you're not necessarily familiar with. So picture this. I'm on a webinar and I'm an attendee and the webinar is going great, but at the same time I'm checking my emails which I hope none of you are now, which I doubt you are. They're not, are they?
I hope not.
You're updating your Facebook status. You're doing that final PowerPoint that you need to do before your presentation tomorrow morning, or you're doing a few things. And then at the end, the webinar ends and you just give them this amazing feedback. So as a webinar organizer or presenter, I'm there thinking, okay, this webinar was great, but in actual fact, people weren't actually listening as well. And one not so alarming fact that did come up is 90% of people actually admitted to checking their emails and doing something else on webinars. So if you take away anything from today's webinar, it's to keep that in mind and really say, how do you really know what people are doing? Because really, you have no idea. So exit feedback isn't always the be-all and end-all. So here are a few things you can do to keep people engaged. Interactive tools, getting people to poll, getting people to write questions, getting people, if you do have more of an educational webinar, you can actually launch a section and promote people and get them to write on a blank document if you like. There's webinars that have all those sorts of tools. A video player, if you want to launch a video throughout to get people engaged or to break the ice. You can even share documents if you want. So many webinar platforms out there offer, or all of them actually do, offer this type of functionality. And a presence manager, we have one of these on today, but I didn't want to scare you all and appear like Big Brother, so I didn't really want to launch it. And of course, I know that you're all paying attention, so it doesn't really need to be needed. So obviously, this presence manager is something that tracks the presence of people. So what you can actually do as a moderator, you can sit there and you can launch this presence manager and it will have a pop-up randomly and it will say, you can put whatever you want. So you could say, are you listening? And it will pop up randomly and you can make it appear for 5 seconds if you like. And then if people don't hit that after 5 seconds, you get a report at the end of the webinar. And you can then say, okay, Simon was on the webinar and Simon hit the button once, but the button came up 10 times. So what was Simon doing for those other 9 times, right? So that's now you can see why I didn't want to scare you all. And then also think of other ways to measure your return on investment. So this really comes back into the planning stages, and this is something entirely different that you should be really considering, and it's really in that marketing white paper we've got there, and it's really about planning your event and knowing your goals and what you want to get out of it at the end, especially if it is a paid event, especially if it is compulsory professional development. You need to know what your goals are, and then you need to find ways of measuring that. So survey feedback is one option, but think of some other ways in terms of how you can actually do that. And that's the final myth. We're going to go into a brief case study in a moment and some more tips, but I think there are a few questions coming through, Isa.
There are a few questions, so we do have time for them. Now, we've got one from Marianne. How long should a webinar go for?
That's a good question. It is, how long is a piece of string? But it does really depend. As a basic webinar or a lot of generic webinars, they go for around 60 minutes, like today's. I think anything more than 90 minutes needs a break in between. So we recommend if you do have a 60-minute webinar, which is quite a good time, 60 minutes is a good time for people to listen and pay attention, then you have 45 minutes and then maybe 15 minutes of Q&A at the end or questions broken up throughout. So if you are doing maybe a 90-minute webinar and you've got way too much content to put in there, think about how you can break that up throughout. We have customers that do 3-hour webinars and they have a break in between for 20 minutes and they ask people to go get a coffee and do something like that. But I would say 60 minutes, I find, is the perfect length, and that's probably 90% of what our customers use, a 60-minute webinar broken up into a few bits. But however long you need, really, depending, you may have something that you want to report on, and it's only going to go for 20 minutes. That's fine. 20 minutes, quickly, hop on for 20 minutes, hop off, do what you need to do. So yeah, that's advice. But once again, something that you can also survey your audience for. Think of it as an exit survey question at the end after webinar. Was this webinar too long for you? What is your preferred time? And get some feedback from people and then actually respond to that with your follow-up webinars.
Great. So we've got one from Catherine. What is the best webinar platform?
Oh, I don't know if I want to answer that. Obviously, I can answer that, and I'm going to say it's Redback, but I'm just going to go back to Colin's question, the fact that webinars are often disguised by sales pitches, and I don't want to go into that too much. But Catherine, it does depend what you need to do, and if you do have any other questions about that afterwards, feel free to contact me. Oh, thanks, Colin. I've got the okay, so we'll just let it ride. You know, Redback's the best. They're amazing. We're amazing. But once again, it does depend on what you want to do. And obviously, we do recommend always to research people out there and see what fits you best. And there's different options. You know, there's people that provide just pay as you go, and you pay a flat fee and you can do it that way. There's people that operate from the United States, and then there's people that operate from Australia as well. So really think about I would say there's three main things. Do you want human support that's available to you? Do you want a local provider? Do you want someone who you just pay and just do it yourself? Or do you want someone to manage your solution? But happy to provide you with a few options after the webinar.
All right, so now on to Jennifer. What if the presence manager might be either distracting or missed if they aren't paying attention?
That's a good point. And once again, I think it really depends on your type of audience as well. And I think Presence Manager I would personally recommend for more professional development purposes where people are gaining points. And you can only have it appear for like 5 seconds if you like. And I'm pretty sure there's a rule on there that you can create if people, do click it more than once or something like that, you can actually turn it off. So there's a few different options that you have. So let's I think if you are doing professional development, and the reason why professional development is great is because you have you have people out there and they say, okay, I want to give people CPD, but once again, I can't actually track what they're doing. So people out there only provide people with professional development points if they do complete an exit survey. So it depends how rigid you are in terms of how you want to provide points like that. But once again, it's horses for courses, and it really does depend. I'm just conscious of time, so I just want to go through the final case study and then get back to the questions. So if we can just move on to the next slide, and then I'll respond to these questions in a minute.
That'd be great. So let's move on. All right, so here goes the case study.
Great. And I just want to go through this because I'm very, very conscious that we've got membership organisations on here and very conscious that a lot of you haven't done webinars before. So I wanted to give you an example of someone else who has and someone who's done it well. So this organisation is the Australian Hand Therapy Association. So they communicate with members all across Australia, and they're the only association that does look after this type of hand therapy, if you like. So they actually had one networking event a year, and this was an annual conference that everyone went to and networked with. And then apart from that, they had their website and they had a newsletter, and that was all the interaction that they had with their members. So their challenge really was to increase the engagement and interaction they had with their members. But at the same time, they wanted to cut down on travel and allow people easy earning of CPD points. And one of the main issues that they did face, they came to us and they're like, oh, I really want to do a webinar, but I'm worried about members. And this goes back to the first myth that we spoke about. We really don't want our members to be turned off by the technology. We want them to embrace what we're doing. So their whole thing was, where do we start? What do we do? How does this all happen, sort of thing. So they actually were very, very proactive in doing this themselves. And we think this is excellent because as a membership organisation launching into something like this, we always say surveying your members is the best thing to do. So they actually launched a new website, they launched a new logo, and they had everything in the background ready to go. And then they actually surveyed their members before anything. So they went out there, they told their members that they were actually launching something like this, and then they got all that feedback back. And the feedback was, this would be great, it's a great way to interact and engage, and it obviously wasn't something that got negative feedback. So they then investigated seamless webinar solutions because they know that they did need to put something together like this, but they also needed it to be easy because, like I said, they wanted it to be embraced. And their pilot webinar, this is interesting, their private webinar was their president who actually conducted it. So this took away all the presenter side of things. So as an organiser, this association only had to go to the president, they knew that he was a great presenter. They knew that they could train him up whenever they wanted to, and they knew that people would genuinely be interested in what he had to say. So their pilot webinar was much easier to organise, whereas if they went out there into, the public speaking world and tried to find someone who was an amazing public speaker on one thing and then get them to actually commit to a webinar, get them to say it's okay to be recorded, they actually got the president to do it straight away. And then, the solution. They chose a managed webinar solution, which is something that we've just put here, but they had 71 people joining live across Australia. So for a first webinar, that's an excellent result, and the attendance was around the 80% mark. So for a first webinar, obviously their members weren't too reluctant because, they knew about it beforehand, they surveyed them, they had their president talking, so it was someone familiar to them. And then, like I said, the feedback was amazing, but they actually had 7 more webinars planned straight after that. So the feedback from that was great. It led to more webinars being planned, and then it led to a national conference discussion to webcast, which is something a little bit different. So that's just an indication of how something like this could work and how you could go into something. Really, I think the main points to take away from here is to find out what you're trying to do with your members. Think about the challenges and what's going to be the issue. Think about how you can make it as easy as possible for your members and as easy for you as an organizer as well. You do want your first webinar to be amazing and you do want everyone to have raving feedback, but if it's going to be hard for you and it's going to take you away from everything else that you're doing, maybe reconsider and maybe do something like having someone from your organization present the webinar. And yeah, that's just a basic run through. If you want any more case studies on anything like that, feel free to let us know in the exit survey feedback and we can send them on to you. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, so now we're moving on to the key learnings.
Great, and I'll wrap it up quite quickly because I'm conscious to get to some questions. Okay, we say before, during, and after your webinar are the basics to planning. So think about what you need to do beforehand, think about what you need to do during, and think about your post-webinar. So focus on content and delivery, number 1. Always recruit and rehearse your presenters, like we said earlier. And sometimes it is, especially considering your audience, sometimes it is difficult to get presenters to actually find a time beforehand to rehearse because a lot of them are academics out there, and that's understandable. But let them know they can do it online. As long as you're getting them familiar with the basics, that's all. Create well-defined, and we say sexy topics. It's a bit naughty, but we say sexy topics because it does make a huge difference to your webinar. Try and mix it up a bit as well. So make sure they're well explained. One of the things that we're actually going to start doing, this is just little inside information. What we're going to do with our webinar invitations, because we run a series, Redback does separately, we're going to start putting levels on there as well. So then we can cater to people who are maybe beginning, medium, and advanced. So that way, if you're doing a topic, just say you are a gardener and you're doing a topic on growing roses, maybe this is going to be tailored to members at a beginning level, as a medium level or an advanced level, as opposed to someone who's really experienced in growing roses. So think about things like that you can incorporate into the presentation. And once again, a variety of marketing channels, and refer to that white paper if you want some more advice on that. And then during your webinar, so the tools available to you, once again, making sure that your presenters are familiar with that. And facilitation, I think, that's something that can't be stressed enough, and it takes so much weight off the presenter. I've got Gavin here, like I said, he's amazing. I don't have to worry about anything. And it just makes things so much easier as a presenter. And then decide on how you're going to use webcams and when you're going to use them. And once it's all over, what are you going to do? Of course, exit survey feedback is a must, but think about other things. How are you going to measure your return on investment? Is it by the amount of people who actually attend your webinar, and then you can go back and compare that? Or if you are charging for your webinar, how much do you want to make off that in terms of profit? And then on-demand content as well, very, very important. And improve and refine. I think don't be scared to get negative feedback, because at the end of the day, you can only improve on that. But if you do get that, make sure that you do listen to it and make sure you improve and refine to let your members know that you're doing everything that you can to make sure it's as seamless as possible. So they're the top tips, I think, if you can take anything out of the webinar. And one, like we said earlier, this is going to be recorded, so you will get a copy of this. But I think we should go into the question section now. And there's the webcams. Hi. We're back.
All right. So we do have a question from Liz. Now she says, we find lots of people don't respond to polls and questions. Are there any tips for getting better interaction?
I think with polls, I think it's really about planning polls as well and breaking the ice when it comes to interaction. So one of the things that we find, and I'll talk about the Q&A text chat box first of all, getting people to type something in the text chat box right at the beginning. Now, we did it a little bit after the introduction today, but one of the things we ask in a lot of our webinars is, the facilitator will ask at the beginning, okay, to get everyone familiar with the text chat box, type in where you're actually calling from today and what the weather's like, or type in something else that may be a little bit more relevant to your association, but something natural, something a little bit more fun to get everyone interacting with each other, tends to go, oh, okay, I can type in that box, and that's how easy it is. Otherwise, people, you can tell them as much as possible how easy it is to interact and ask a question, but if you let them do something, it's going to come across much more second nature. And then also another tip is to maybe think of canned questions that you can ask. It's the same as when you're in a room and you're in a live presentation and you're never some people, I know, oh, should I ask this question? Am I going to be the first person to ask a question that I don't really think is going to be relevant? Have a canned question maybe, and you can actually, we ask people to submit questions before the webinar as well through the registration process. So you can just come online and say, we had this question asked the other day, and, make sure it's relevant to your organisation. It can be a little bit cheeky, but I think it's for good purpose. You want people to engage, and if someone then says, so-and-so asked a question, so that must have been okay, I can do the same thing, that might also encourage people to ask questions. And with polls, I think poll early and poll often and make it relevant. And even think of your first poll, as something a little bit fun as well to get people engaged. Some of the organisations we work with, and it depends what you're doing webinars for these, but some people use them for professional development purposes and they'll get points, and they won't actually receive their points if they don't complete the polls. So that's a little bit different maybe to what you're doing, but just keep in mind that you can actually report on all the polls and everything in the text chat box. So hopefully that's answered your question.
All right, now on to Chris. How successful is it to open up the phone lines and allow participants to discuss a case or question together?
Oh, this is interesting, and this really depends on the size of your webinar as well. So I think if we had everyone on, how many people are exactly on this webinar today, Gavin?
We have just over 40
okay.
now. We had 50 earlier.
Yep, so what that actually says, if we open the lines for every single person on here now, it would be a little bit chaotic because you don't know what's happening in the background. Little things such as air conditioning or something could be playing in the background, and that could even create havoc times 40. So if it is something that you want to do, I would probably keep it to small groups, and I would advise people beforehand that it is going to be open lines. And what I would also do with telephone conferencing, there's a lot of commands that you can use. So you can have people mute their own lines, or you can do operator-assisted calls where you get your provider to actually mute the lines for you. So there's much more setup involved to do something like that. It definitely can be done, but definitely think about how you want that to run, how many people you're going to have online, and make sure it's organised beforehand.
Great. So from Andrew now, my concern would be funding the cost of hosting web seminars. What sort of funding models do your clients have?
Yeah. We have a variety of clients that use these sort of platforms for paid professional development, and obviously that takes the cost off their hands. But one of the things that's become quite common lately is sponsorship. So we've got some people that use sponsorship. So they actually go out there to an organisation that's very relevant to what they're doing, and they actually ask them to sponsor their webinar, and it's not a huge cost. Liz has just asked about the average cost of hosted webinars, and I can get back to you with that after. But it's not a huge cost for someone to sponsor. And, if you think of from your webinar invitations that you're sending out, to your database of thousands potentially, including logos on that, including logos on registration pages, including them on the webinar, you can set up on the page here, you can even the login page, different logos of different sponsors and stuff like that. So sponsorship is something that a lot of our clients have started using in order to cover costs with these sorts of things.
Great. So we'll quickly move on to Andrew's question. Do you know of any organisations running AGMs via this format? What has been learnt from that?
Yeah, definitely have people running AGMs. Like I said, it's a platform that anyone can use for anything, so you'd be surprised with some of the things that people use it for. With annual general meetings, I think it really is about the facilitation is paramount. It's really about having someone facilitate. And with the AGMs, I think a lot of it plays into webcams as well. A lot of people prefer the webcams, but it really depends how many people it's going out to. And generally we find annual general meetings are one-to-many communication. So they're not as interactive as a webinar maybe. There's another platform, and I won't go into it in too much detail because I don't want to confuse anybody because it can be quite tricky, and that's a webcasting platform where it's a broadcasted message that goes out to thousands, and people can still ask questions, but it's high-definition video that you're watching, and it's the ability from one person to just stream. You could be in your office if you like, and you could have a big high-definition videographer come in, and your webcam is taking up the entire size of the screen, and that's one-to-many communication. And that's, I think, annual general meetings don't need the interaction that a webinar does, from what we find. And we also think annual general meetings can be taken a little step further in terms of the quality, if you like, of that. So I hope that has answered your question.
All right. So that's all the questions for today. I'd like to pass it on to Sarah for some closing comments.
Yeah, I think that wraps it up. I think, hopefully you've gotten something out of this, whether you're new to webinars or whether you're looking to enhance what you're currently doing. Please feel free to get back to us if you have any questions at all. If you have any immediate questions, please feel free to type them into the exit survey at the end and let us know anything else that you would like, and enjoy. I think, the whole thing is to enjoy the process, have fun with it, learn from it, improve it, and at the end of the day, you're giving something back to your members. So one of our clients said in the case study long ago, if it's going to add value, then just do it. And I think that's really poignant for something like this. So thank you, everybody. Keep a lookout for the webinar recording. That will be sent shortly. And thanks once again for joining. It's been great to have you. So on behalf of Associations Forum and Redback, I'll thank you and hand it over to Gavin.
Thanks, Sarah and Isa, and thanks everyone for joining today's very inspirational webinar. On behalf of Redback and Associations Forum, I would like to thank our two special guests for their time today and their wonderful insights. If anyone would like any additional information from today's webinar or from Redback on how to host your own webinars, please feel free to let us know in the exit survey, which you will now be redirected to. Enjoy the rest of your day.